Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Peter Kuplowsky, who you might know as the programmer of TIFF's Midnight Madness series for the last couple of years, or as the producer of The Void, The Interior, and Manborg. He also turned up as the villain in Justin Decloux's Teddy Bomb, and he and Justin run the Laser Blast Film Society screening series at the Royal in Toronto, where they celebrate lost classics from the VHS era of the 80s and 90s. This Thursday, December 20th, they're presenting a new digital restoration of Renee Manzour's Dial Code Santa Claus, a thriller about a latchkey kid fending off a Santa-suited predator with surprising violence that predates Home Alone by a full year. So you should see that. Peter picked Don't Let the Riverbeast Get You, Charles Roxburgh and Matt Farley's 2012 salute to small-town monster movies, starring Farley as Neil Stewart, a man who returns home after fleeing in shame years earlier because he said he saw a monster and no one believed him. And if that synopsis makes you think of the disposable creature features Roger Corman used to crank out in the 50s and 60s, well, yeah. But in practice, Don't Let the Riverbeast Get You is a much, much stranger experience, and one I wasn't really expecting. If you know Matt Farley's work, it's apparently all part of a continuum, so here's Peter to explain it. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Well, I chose Don't Let the Riverbeast Get You because I think it does represent my passion for outsider artists. And to go back even further, Matt Farley, who is sort of the visionary behind the film, he didn't direct the film. His friend Charles Roxburgh, who's his regular collaborator, directed the film. But Matt produced it, starred in it, co-wrote it.
Wrote the songs.
It is an extension of the Matt Farley cinematic universe. And who is Matt Farley? Why should anyone care about this guy? Why do I care so much about him? He's actually one of the first filmmakers I ever saw in my capacity as a curator.
Okay.
And my first year at Toronto After Dark, my first year as a feature programmer for that film festival, I happened to see his film Freaky Farley. And it was this low-budget, shot on 16mm, which is a rarity in the mid-2000s, film that was a sort of like a slasher in the style of Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2. Not even the first one. Definitely decisively a tribute to sort of Part 2 of that series, right. Among other sort of B-movies and regional community horror films. And when initially watching it, I was like, is this just a bad movie, or is he in on the joke? And as I watched, I was like, no, he isn't on the joke. And yet there's this incredible tension between earnestness and irony where I felt like he was never dipping over on either side. And I emailed him at the time, and I actually emailed Charlie Roxburgh at the time to just be like, hey, listen, I really appreciate your movie. And I actually did pitch it to my bosses at Toronto After Dark, and they didn't think they could do anything with it. And I wanted to apologize for that, but just to say that, like, I appreciate what you're doing. And then I didn't think about them, really. I kept it on my shelf with a lot of the other weird movies that I see as a curator. I have this box that is dedicated to all the stuff that I think is wonderful and bizarre and weird, and most of which has never, to this day, 10, 12 years later, has never been released.
Yeah, we were talking about that a little while ago. The stuff that you see, the stuff that I see that just never
comes
surfaces
out. Yeah, I mean, because some stuff makes it even as far as like a premiere at a film festival, and then never comes out.
Yeah, I've seen 5 or 6 films that no one else has in that capacity, right?
Yeah.
Just because they were submitted to something. Or you get the feeling like you're the only one. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but no one else I know has ever seen X, Y, and Z.
So I had not thought of Matt Farley or this movie for a few years, but then I was doing a screening of a film that had witches in it. I think it was Eyes of Fire, another really fantastic movie that deserves to be re-released at some point, also by an outside art filmmaker. And because Freaky Farley had some scenes with witches in it, I was like, oh, let me just get all those scenes and cut them up and put them in a pre-show. And then watching it again, I was like, man, I'm really charmed by this guy. I wonder what he's been up to in the last 10 years. And it turns out he's written 20,000 songs and earns a passive income of now $30,000 a year from people accidentally listening to his music on Spotify. He has been on The Tonight Show. He has, where a friend of mine likes to joke that, if you were on The Tonight Show in the 70s, it would make your career. Today, You were just a bit.
Yeah, it's a blip.
And he remained a prolific filmmaker. And the first film I went to watch after, rediscovering this sort of eccentric creator, outsider artist, folk artist, was Don't Let the Riverbeast Get You. And I think out of all his movies, I think that this is sort of his masterpiece. Like, I think it's the purest distillation of the tone and spirit that he is trying to capture in his tributes to the regional cinema that's, one could argue, spanned from like the late 60s to the early 80s in America and Middle America.
Yeah.
The Don Dolers of the world, the folks that sort of followed in Ed Wood's wake, these kind of huckster filmmakers that just got their community together to make a movie with the hopes of it making some money. And the thing that's always just sort of struck me about Matt is that he's kind of a guy who decided he wanted to be a celebrity, but he didn't want to move to a town that you should move to if you want to be a celebrity. He lives in Danvers, Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And he just said, you know what, I'm just going to build my universe here through my songs, of which, again, he's written 20,000 songs. They're literally just songs about anything. Yeah. But over time, you actually begin to hear meta-narratives throughout the songs. A good example I like to use is he has a singer called he has 72 different band acts, and one of his acts is the guy who sings about towns and cities. And he has an album called I've Never Left My Hometown, which is a tell-all about the fact that all these albums that he's written about towns and cities are completely made up, and he's never left his town. He's waiting for this girl of his dreams, and it's this really actually kind of nice and sweet concept album. And so I just love that he's created this community. All his movies sort of star the same people in his town. None of them are professional actors. And the thing that I think is the enchilada for me is that he doesn't ask his actors and performers to set out to perform badly. He just casts people who will give sincere performances that are just rather dopey, and he'll just overwrite the script with his friends in a vernacular that is so esoteric and loquacious in a really amusing way. Like, people use adjectives like indecorous,
right?
Or
this is the worst wedding of which. This is not the wedding of which I dreamed.
This is not the wedding of which I dreamt.
That's right.
And or for instance, one of my favorite running gags in Riverbeast is anytime they refer to a character's son, they specify that it was a son from another marriage.
Right.
And that repetition, I find so hilarious. I also think the film, and I don't want to spoil it on this podcast because I really want to encourage people to seek out this movie, which I think is a good starting place for the world of Matt Farley. I think it has one of the best punchlines in movie history. I think there's a punchline towards the end of this film regarding the character played by Kevin McGee, who is one of my favorite actors in the stable of the Matt Farley cinematic universe, or I should call the Motown media universe, because that's his sort of fake conglomerate company that owns all these properties, Motown Media.
Yeah, I was referring to it as the Farleyverse, but that just makes people think of Chris Farley.
Yeah. No, I call it, it's Motown Media, so it is still an MCU. It's the Motown Cinematic Universe.
The Motooniverse.
I even refer to this ethos that Matt has as Moturnism. This idea of don't wait for permission to make something. Don't wait for permission for someone to validate what you're making is good or interesting. If you like creating something, simply do it. And in the last few years, those are the artists I've been attracted to, and I've been finding myself more fascinated, and it's the type of artist that I try to champion in What the Film Festival. Artists that I feel are really working and creating work for the pure enjoyment of the process of making that work and creating a community with their friends, and with and so that the very act of production is part of the art itself. Matt has a podcast as well, of course he does. He self-aggrandizes, calls himself the greatest singer-songwriter of all time on it. But he also says things like, why would you go to a party or a barbecue? That's the worst thing you can do in the world. Make a movie, and it's like the equivalent of the social experience you're going to have at the party, but so much better, because at the end of this party, in quotation marks, you're going to have a movie. Like, just invite everybody over, let's make a movie together. And I just really find that spirit so endearing.
This is not wrong either.
So to that was a roundabout way of talking about the film.
Yeah.
The specific plot of the movie.
Don't feel like you have to go into it all, just because people will. Ideally, people are going to listen to this because they've seen it or because they're curious about it. But there's no reason to go beat for beat.
I feel like
I don't know that you could either.
No, because it's a movie that is sort of a string of bizarre vignettes and episodes under a loose sort of monster attacks a town framework. And one of the reasons why I thought it would be fun to do is because it does. I know you're a big Jaws fan, and I feel like it's definitely in the tradition of maybe Jaws ripoffs.
Well, I was going to say the Riverbeast itself is not. I mean, it's glimpsed at the very beginning, and then not seen for, 50 minutes?
Well, there's this wonderful gag where they open the film with a William Castle spoof with the idea that the Riverbeast is such a scary image that the producers have been recommended to warn the audience before it shows up by flashing two red frames before it shows up. And the Riverbeast gets an early appearance maybe in the first 8 minutes, but it doesn't really show up again for like an hour and 10 minutes. And I began to also really enjoy how the red frames became a pretty funny punchline. There's a moment too where someone just sort of absently says, I'm just going to go to the woods now. And it does the flash frame. And it's literally been like maybe 40 minutes since we've last seen the Riverbeast. So it comes as a pretty fun punchline.
I kept... you described it as a tension, and it's exactly right, because I kept being reminded that the film is more clever than the characters in it, and the execution is sort of part of the game and sort of not. Sort of not, because at the end of the day, like they're filmmakers using meager resources, and they don't have lighting. They don't have costumes. I don't think people are showing up in their clothes from home. Yeah, but I do feel like certain things are very strategic. I've always been struck by how much Matt Farley looks exactly like Mark Wahlberg in The Happening. It's funny. There are different angles where he looked like. Half the time, I thought he looked like. Just like every character actor from the 60s. Mm-hmm. There's a John Gavin-ness to him in some of the shots. There is definitely like an old American type of actor kind of look to his face. It's like that I think is very charismatic. I think he's a great foundation for all these movies, but it's funny, it's the same thing that Trey Parker does in the first half of Orgasmo. Yeah. Or just like Johnny Whitebread. Yeah. He just sort of fades into the role. Yeah. And uses the look, his all-Americanism, not against the character exactly, but it's a signifier to us that the guy isn't as, everyone says he's the best tutor in the world. He's this composite, I feel, of all these type of tropes of protagonists, in kind of B movies. Yeah. He's also like James Stewart in The Wonderful Life, basically. Yeah. Like this guy that the entire community is sort of enamored with, and he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders as he moves through this world. Yeah, and then he transitions into Steve McQueen in The Blob. Just this all-American clean-cut kid who's suddenly the only person, because his age fluctuates. I like that in the context or in the proximity of the town's one police officer who is played by Jimmy Hugh, I believe Matt's uncle, who's incredibly hostile to him. Also, sometimes barely being able to get his lines out, or like clearly his lines are 80 yard to death because like he's tripping over his lines in a very endearing way, and that. Yeah, he's very hostile to Matt, and Matt suddenly snaps into like, I'm a teenager in a 50s biker gang movie in terms of his attitude and his like demeanor, where in other scenes he's much more stately or more more in like a James Stewart. He's like an adult figure of responsibility, only when necessary. And then he's also, I was trying to figure it out. If you just straight up line up his character and list all his attributes, he's an academic who destroyed his own career when he told people he saw a monster and no one believed him. 2 years ago? 4 years ago? It's vague. I love too that the film almost implies that it's a sequel to a film that we never saw. Like there's extended backstory and constant exposition of things that occurred that we, I guess, are now catching up on. And the pulp quality too, the noir quality of the girl he left behind who's gone to another man, and all this other weird, and there's two reporters that are responsible for his bad reputation, both of whom anachronistically feel like they belong in the 1940s. Well, when does the film take place, right? I was trying to figure that out as well. No one has a cell phone. No, there are no computers in evidence. I think someone plays video games though. I think it's
That's possible.
It's alluded to.
I mean, and all the cars are of course modern.
Yeah,
there's no attempt.
There's no.
Yeah,
exactly. But there's no gloss or patina of period. It just isn't here. Whatever we're watching isn't now.
The thing that's interesting too about Matt's movies is that each one takes place in a different town that might as well just be the same town. Like he pretty much shoots entirely in Manchester, New Hampshire, and a little bit in Danvers. But for the most part, he actually shoots in New Hampshire, which is where he actually went to college, and so that's where he began his movies. But he's got Thomasville, there's Rivertown here, he's got Manch Vegas is the name of one, which is the colloquial term for Manchester, apparently, from that region.
Really?
Yeah, they call it Manch Vegas because it's a college town, so people kind of go like, "Oh, you're gonna go to Manchester? You're gonna have a wild time." it's the Las Vegas of
party town of New Hampshire.
Of New Hampshire, yeah. Manch Vegas is one of them, and then his recent film Slingshot Cops, Woodville Center is the name of the town, so it's not even like a town, it's more like a borough.
Right. And again, they're names that sound folksy but aren't real.
No.
They're a neverwhere kind of America.
Yeah.
That again, it all feeds into while I was watching it I was thinking about Larry Blameyer. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name, but the Lost Skeleton of Cadaver.
Yes, yeah. I definitely thought of Lost Skeleton of Cadaver when I first saw the film. I do think Matt is more successful at preserving an earnestness than I think Cadaver.
He doesn't wink.
Yeah, he doesn't wink or lean into it as much as Cadaver does. I mean, I'm reminded of early John Waters with a lot of the sense of community. It's like wholesome John Waters though. Like it's not perverse or dirty.
Yeah, no one's depraved. There's no the violence is off camera mostly. When people get stabbed, it's not bloody.
Yeah, and a lot of this. I mean, another way to sort of understand Matt's movies is he also has another podcast called Shock Marathons, based on a series of books that he self-published with his friends, where they would.
Of course, he did.
Yeah, he would do 24-hour film marathons of straight to video. Or just sort of B-movie stuff, and then they would just write a book in the subsequent 24 hours about that experience. And those films kind of reading about those films and watching the movies, you begin to see the DNA in terms of what he's reaching for and what sort of the tropes and iconography is inspired by. Because sometimes he actually does lean into a very explicit reference. There are lines in Riverbeast, some of which I'm escaping me now. I know that when Matt's character is put in prison at one point, eating a pitiful pita and pickle meal, which I find is a really funny joke. That this may be not even an intentional joke, but I feel like Matt thinks of everything, I've come to learn. But he says like, "I'm in a cage, man," which is like a real out of nowhere line reading. And I'm positive that line comes from a specific movie where they're throwing like a specific movie reference in. But they always try to find the most esoteric lines that they can find. It's very rare that they'll go for. I mean, the most memorable line that I can think of that I think most cult movie fans would recognize is in Freaky Farley, where someone says "Recruitment Day," like Garbage Day from Silent Night, Deadly Night 2. But I feel like ever since that movie, they've been a lot less obvious in terms of where their specific references are coming from.
But that makes sense too, because he's building these worlds for himself, and it's going to get weirder and more internal as you go. Mm-hmm. The thing that strikes me about Farley specifically mimicking regional filmmakers is that that's where you get Carnival of Souls, that's where you get Night of the Living Dead, right? Like these were really weird. This was a really strange period in American cinema, as you say, where anything was possible.
I even feel like Martin is actually a really good, like as a movie that I think if Farley had tweaked his sensibilities another way, he could have made something like Martin. Like if he was leaning into something that was more serious. But there's a quirk to the whole relationship between the grandfather and the son in that film that honestly feels like something out of a Matt Farley universe.
Well, Romero's like, when I finally met him, it really surprised me how vaudevillian he was in his affect. Like, he liked weird jokes, and he would slip into the same kind of Stan Lee delivery that people of a certain age and a certain demographic, like New York guys who grew up on the East Coast in the 40s would do. And Martin has these weird little burps of comedy. The Crazies is full of them, and it went away because there's no humor in Night of the Living Dead, and as that sort of overtook and eclipsed the rest of the work he did between Night and Dawn, people just thought, oh, George Romero's a really scary guy. And it's like, nah, he was like a grandfather when he was probably 25. He was a weird, quirky guy. But there is a strange continuity between that and some of the attitudes in Riverbeast. Not necessarily any specific scene or any specific moment, but just the general openness to being goofy, and the way that maybe if you don't come at this straight on, if you let the music tell the story, if you let like if you step down the light, it would probably be creepier. But that's just not where Farley wants to go.
Yeah, no, I think he always, I mean, he's a guy who's never swore in his entire life. He just decided when he was a kid he never swore. He's never had a hamburger until he turned 40, which he did for the first time at his 5.5-hour concert that he started doing for the last 2 years, of which I attended twice. And the thing about his concerts, there's this 5.5-hour show.
Aren't the songs really short?
Well, yes, you hear about like 50, 60 songs. And there are breaks. There are breaks through the 5.5-hour show. About 20 people on average go to this show. No one from the same state. There were literally people from Australia, from Belgium, at these shows, and it's amazing. Dan Deacon, the composer, he went to the first show, and at this show, it's not just a concert. It's actually like a meta Matt Farley narrative. So characters from his films will show up in character and perform sketches in the middle of the show. Like when I first actually met Matt, he was doing a walking tour of New Hampshire. So me and a friend decided to go see if anyone would show up, because it was over the summer, and we're like, let's go meet Matt Farley. And we went, and only 3 people showed up. My 2 friends, like my friend, myself, and my friend included, and a lawyer from Connecticut.
But you guys are going to tell this story for the rest of your life.
Oh, totally. And it wasn't just a walking tour. As we were walking through the scenes from Riverbeast, characters from Riverbeast had been waiting for 90 minutes for us to eventually walk by so that they could show up and do a scene from the movie. Or like it was a level of, it was only almost Kaufman-esque I mean Andy Kaufman, in terms of how high concept and for so few people this joke was.
Right. Tommy Wiseau wishes he could do this. Yeah. Just in terms of the idea of crafting beyond the screen.
And that's something I love about Matt, is that he thinks of these ideas that everyone else would often just think with a group of friends and go, great.
Yeah.
That would be fun to do. And then he goes, no, what if we did it? What if I did do that? Last year he did a Christmas special because it just came out of a conversation of like, oh, it'd be fun to do like a Motown Christmas special and just put it on YouTube and have people go, what's this all about? And he did like a full hour-long Christmas special that was like a very Merry Christmas or any of those kind of like, right. But all about like his celebrity and his community of people. And he's now working on, he's been always pissed off about music docs, and so he wants to finally make a music doc about himself. He already has his own biopic. It's called Local Legends, which I legitimately think if that film was shot on 16mm and came out in 1994, he would have had a Kevin Smith like trajectory or something like that. I think people would have really embraced what he was doing. I do feel like, even though Riverbeast is my favorite movie, I miss the 16mm aesthetic of his earlier films. There was like an extra authenticity to them, even though, I mean, I get it. Like, it's expensive to shoot on film, and it's only more expensive. And the fact that he's spending all this money on these movies, again, like he loses money on almost everything he makes. Right. He still has boxes of these DVDs and stuff. That was another thing on the walking tour. He'd be like, "Oh, take a look in that newspaper box. See what you find." It's like, "Oh, a copy of Riverbeast. Thanks, Matt." So. I mean, there are other filmmakers that I think exist in this sort of wave of indie artists that I've recently been fascinated with, and I can totally go into those before we wrap up as well. But to stay on Riverbeast, I don't know what because
this was my first experience.
This was your first experience.
I had heard, basically, I was aware of Farley.
Yeah.
The most information I had was probably from the Important Cinema Club episode that Justin and Will did, where they delved into him and then actually had an interview with him.
Yeah.
But having come up through the 80s, like my first professional gig was reviewing literally everything that was released on VHS went through the Star for the home video magazine, and I would watch 30 to 50 movies a month because it was insane. Everything came out, and there was There was slick garbage, there was regular garbage, there was cheap garbage, and then every now and then you would see something that had clearly been written.
Yeah.
That had a sense of, if not gravitas, at least sense of
identity.
Humor. Or there was a signature, and you would start to see it here and there, and you would find people, or before. I'm trying to think of a good example, but the first movie I ever reviewed professionally, I don't think I've ever told this story before, was Return of the Killer Tomatoes.
Okay, yeah.
Which is not bad.
No.
And introduced me to George Clooney, among other things. And you sit there and think, okay, having originally watched the first one, I don't know, 5 or 6 years earlier, and not really thought too much about it because it was pretty dumb, to watch someone that I'd never heard of, I can't even remember who the writers were now, but to watch these people figure out a way to do this properly, to take this very stupid idea of Killer Tomatoes and then give John Astin a big mad scientist role and have a running gag about product placement going through the entire film because they run out of money halfway through the picture and have to fund it themselves.
Yeah.
I just sat there and thought, this is so much better than it has any right to be.
Yeah.
And it encourages your participation, right? Like, it doesn't just say, if you don't get it, you're dumb. It keeps going. It keeps building the joke and trying to pull people in.
It's funny because your experience watching all these movies as a reviewer, specifically like that kind of era and those kind of releases.
And this was in the days when you didn't get a box art. You got a black cassette with a white sleeve.
Yeah.
And a cutout to show you.
But it's like what I've done for the last 12 years as a programmer, that I'm just getting discs. And honestly, the first year I did After Dark, first 2 years, we were still getting VHS submissions. It was like the last gasp of VHS submissions.
That's how I saw. What's the one that was the most fun experience? Oh, Undead, the Spirit Brothers movie.
Yeah.
Because TIFF was still giving us tapes.
Yeah.
And they gave me a cassette of it, and it was the Midnight Madness closer.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that at the time. I just knew that this was it was a month before the festival, and it was dropped in a bunch of stuff, and I found it and it said Undead on it. Like, all right, I'm in.
That sense of discovery is wonderful, but I think that's where I think I have developed this taste and affinity for some of these filmmakers, because I will watch a wave of mediocrity, a wave of stuff that feels like it is made purely to validate its own existence. It's like we're going through the steps just so that we have the bare minimum of what constitutes a movie, or we're making a film because we really want to make another film, but this is our stepping stone film.
Right.
But
how many times have you seen a Scream knockoff or a...
Yeah, or
whatever follows
or Possession,
earlier, whatever
Possession
the thing
knockoff
was.
or an Insidious knockoff. I mean, the amount of times I even meet with sales agents to say, hey, we got this new sleep paralysis film. It's the first film about sleep paralysis. And it's like, no, it is not.
No, it is not.
This has been a little bit of a phenomenon for the last 8 years.
Yeah.
And then you see something that is as you said, it is being made with an intentionality that it's written. And what I always like to refer to as decisions. You are seeing decisions being made. And I know that sounds glib because, of course, decisions get made on bad movies. But there's an arbitrariness to stuff. And when you see that, you're like, I'm in the hands where someone actually has a vision and an idea and wants to take me somewhere, whether it ends up being good or not. But there's real decisiveness in the decision. To me, when everyone asks, like, what do I look for in a film, even if they're asking me to be specific about a Midnight Madness film, I just want to see something that's been directed, like that really truly directed, that and that their identity is woven, and when I mean identity, I don't necessarily mean just the auteur. And because I think Matt's films are not just a product of Matt, they're a product of the people he has surrounded himself with. And I think so much of the charm comes from Charlie, comes from Tom Scalzo, Chris Peterson, Jim McHugh, Kevin Mead. All these players are so intrinsic to why his movies work, and why his music works for that matter too, because many of them are involved in his music. But it's that there is an identity, there is a soul to these films that other films simply just don't have.
Yeah.
And that's the best feeling. And it must be as a critic too, when you're going through stuff.
Oh yeah.
And then you have this moment of like, okay, I had no expectations going into this thing, and I'm actually in the hands of someone who's telling me a story that I'm interested in hearing.
Yeah, I want to be surprised.
Yeah.
Just once in a movie is great. Twice is great. When you realize 20 minutes in that you're seeing something that no one's attempted before.
Yeah.
I find like those movies
interesting decisions, and this is how I've sold What the Film Festival. It is an opportunity to see movies with decisions you have never seen before. You will see a choice an actor that no actor has made that decision before.
For good or ill.
For good or ill. Yeah. For good or ill. But at the same time, when it's a first, it's going to be indelible at the very least.
Yeah. What was I can't remember. I'm blanking on the title. The Paradox. The one last year about the computer that figured out how to predict people's decisions. Elaborate title that is escaping me right now. That was a WTF, wasn't it?
A WTF computer movie? Hang on a second.
Or was an algorithm or a paradigm? There's a bunch of people around.
Oh yeah, the Laplace's Demon. Laplace's Demon. Yeah.
So that was something where, again, we have seen so many of these movies that hinge on something being able to predict.
Yeah, I mean, because it was almost a Saw film, basically.
Yeah. But it found a way to do it in a way that I'd never seen before. And I just, again, I remember thinking, oh, this is not what it could have been. Yeah. And it's better.
Yeah.
You know, at this point, I'm thinking about Insidious partially because you just mentioned it, but also because my 10 worst list was just finished and it's in there, the last key.
Oh, the last one. I haven't seen the last key. I've always been frustrated with those films because I think the first film is brilliant.
The first one's good.
I think
it's like a reverse Poltergeist.
It's a reverse Poltergeist, but I actually think the first film. But I feel like I'm a bit of a jaded horror guy because I sometimes don't get scared because I've just seen so many horror films. Yeah. But Insidious was a film that honestly for me was like, this is the Jaws of going to bed. I think the concept of that movie was so universal. The idea that if you have lucid dreaming and have an active imagination when you go to bed and you have like vivid dreams, that actually could be an astral projection of that is leaving your body exposed to a demon hopping into it. I found that really, really scary, and I really loved the universal quality of it, and I was frustrated that the sequels decided to localize it. They decided to go, well, actually, the old lady is this cross-dresser that lived down the street.
Yeah,
I was
like,
what?
Thing, yeah.
No. This should be like, you could be in Myanmar, anywhere, and you go to sleep, and these demons are all over the place. This old lady can visit anyone. That's the reason why there's this universal image of an old lady that sits in your chest that like people with sleep paralysis have. That's where they come from. It's this idea that there's all these demons, and I haven't seen that. I don't know. Did the last key bring back Darth Maul?
He's around. They're all around.
Because I always felt like they didn't take advantage of that element, even though it was a goofy element in the first film. It was also like, okay, this is weird.
It's the biggest scare in the film.
It's the best scare in the film,
and I brought it back.
And I wonder from a lot of I think I'll be okay to say this. So at the end of Insidious 2, this is a weird segue, but the reason I want to bring this up, at the end of Insidious 2, there's like the final moment is a character looking and seeing something in the corner of the room, and you just don't see what's in that corner of the room, and it's like, oh, what could she be seeing? It's really scary. There's a version of the film that must have been a version when we were considering it for a film festival, where you see that it's just a gang of people with their face on fire, like a gang of the dark. And I'm like, that's such a more interesting idea, and I just wanted that series to go in that direction. I really wanted that series to explore like gangs of demons. It's the same with The Conjuring. I really liked Conjuring. I like the concept of The Conjuring 2.
So self-limiting.
The concept of Conjuring 2 that Conjuring 2 is a sting operation. It's a demon sting operation. Demons have been like, we don't like these guys. Yeah. We don't like the Warrens.
They're on our turf.
They're on our turf. We're going to set up a sting. We're going to like get them invested in the case. But we've actually got this other spirit who's got a whole, like, that is such a cool idea, and I feel like the movies don't take advantage of it. They go in like the other direction.
Yeah. No, my biggest problem with the Insidious movies and with the Saw movies and with the Conjuring movies is that now they're simply about people wandering around waiting for the thing to happen.
Yeah.
And it just bores the
I am a bit of an apologist for the Saw film somehow.
Someone has to be.
I mean, it's partially because me and my friends decided to binge them all in one day.
Oh, God.
And it became kind of like, we got into the soap opera rhythm of it, and we weren't really enjoying ourselves. See, a lot of people go like, well, the first one is pretty good. I kind of disagree. For me, that movie comes alive when they start in kind of 4 and at the end of 3.
Jigsaw's family?
Well, they're introducing multiple Jigsaws, and they're doing the cross, like one movie is taking place at the same time as the other movie.
Right.
That's when I started to kind of enjoy it, and I really like the Collector and the Collection films that followed them. I thought those films are actually legitimately, I think, great horror
those are
movies.
decent executions of that premise. The thing that's missing from the Saw movies for me is that there needs to be, now that we know how complex the mythology is and how many moving parts there are, I want the noises off version. I want to watch the other doors where people are kind of moving back and forth and one person has to... Because the assistants don't know of each other's existence.
I actually think that element is why I liked 4 a little bit, because it does get into that a bit, because part of 4 is kind of like, oh, this is what was happening across all these other movies. That's kind of funny. But I was so surprised that the Spears brothers were so lifeless. I know. And I really don't know what happened, because when they were...
that and Winchester, I think they were just working to delivery, right? Like
I guess. But Winchester at least had some really interesting ideas.
Yeah. Again, it's still people walking into a dark room waiting for something to go boo.
Sure. But it at least had this angle about gun control set then that was like, oh, this is kind of an interesting idea. And the idea of spirits being connected to an weapon of violence.
The thing that killed them.
I thought that was a neat idea.
That's the stuff they came up with in the room to sell it, and then it just got over.
And it just felt vanilla. But Jigsaw, I actually feel there's so much potential.
Oh, there absolutely is.
with Jigsaw.
I pitched one on Twitter that week, and the writer of Jigsaw, one of the writers went, that's a good idea.
Yeah,
you can have it. Do something. But it's if we could do that.
Yeah, we could do that.
We could talk about Jigsaw and the potential Saw franchise extensions.
Now, would you watch another film by Matt Farley?
I would watch Matt Farley's Jigsaw. I would actually. Yeah. I would be curious. I found it really, like the idiosyncrasy was really interesting, and the sense that I was watching somebody who knew what he wanted to do and was doing it, whether or not it worked. That's interesting. I don't know that I liked the experience of it. I think there's stuff in it that I'm going to enjoy thinking about. But overall, like, it's too long.
Yeah.
It's 97 minutes and could have been 80. I mean, most of these things need to be 75 to 80 minutes, just because otherwise, if the whole point of it is you're referencing a type of film that already exists, then... Like, I find that premise is really elastic, but it snaps back really hard if you get to the end of the rubber band and you start thinking, well, I could actually be watching The Creature from the Black Lagoon.
I mean, I know that. I definitely understand that instinct. I remember when Black Dynamite came out, a lot of people were really critical of that movie, going like, I'll just watch a blaxploitation film.
Yeah.
And I agree with that sentiment, though I've also sometimes argued that I think that's the wrong lens to watch Black Dynamite in. Because I actually think Black Dynamite is basically doing Airplane. Yeah, and yes, you could watch Airport 77, but
Airplane's more fun.
But Airplane might be more fun.
Yeah.
Though,
Black Dynamite
though I do understand, a lot of blaxploitation films are just as fun, if not more fun, than Black Dynamite. But with Matt's stuff, for me at least, I have always found that he has ended up transcending the material because I just like the characters and I like hanging out with them. And I just find them to be sort of a novel, sort of endearing group of individuals to chill around with.
There is a really weird sweetness to the relationships. I mean, just the guy in the basement who becomes our hero's roommate.
Yeah, Teddy.
Teddy is such a strange, supportive adversary. They fight for nothing. I saw her first. This really
it's the same as there's Tudor friends that fight all the time in like a weird kind of way that it's as if we've been watching a TV series and it's like these two. And that's the relationship. The movie is already assuming our endearment, but at the same time, for me, it wins me over. I do wonder what you would think about his biopic, Local Legends, which is less of a spoof. It's very much more...
so it's his biography of himself.
It's basically a biography that explains... He said he was getting tired of people asking him, like, what's his whole shtick? And so, like, I'll just make a movie about it. And it's one that he actually directed himself. Charlie worked on it, but he considered it was really mostly born out of his head, so that's why he took the director credit. And it's black and white, and it's kind of, going for a Clerks meets Annie Hall kind of vibe at times. It's still like a shot-on mini-DV movie, and it still has moments of weakness, but it's also under 90 minutes. So
it's a big plus. Big plus.
It might be a big plus there.
It's award season. I'm coming off everything being 2 3/4 hours.
Yeah, that is true. And he incidentally, he's told me when I last talked with him that he is working on his last film, Slingshot Cops, actually ran into the issue that you described, for me at least, which is it was sort of a parody of 80s buddy cop movies.
Right.
And I actually felt, you know what, that is a well that I've seen a lot of, and like there's Hot Fuzz and there's so many sort of movies that kind of riff on the Heat, like other movies that kind of riff on that kind of buddy cop dynamic.
And you would need a lot of money to do that right. I could see this working against his aesthetic.
Yeah, that and elements of the film actually really do work. And I think, I know Justin's a bigger fan of it than I am. I still like the film, and just purely because I like his universe and like his characters. But I did feel like there was a specificity to Riverbeast, what it is parodying and what it is doing, that felt broader in Slingshot Cops and therefore didn't work as much for me, because I felt like it was stuff I could get from other movies.
Right.
But his next project, which I'm not allowed to say the name of and will not repeat, he swore me to secrecy. It's a great title, though, and get ready for it at some point. But he is intending to write a movie that is more consciously... as he's put it, when characters say lines, they're supposed to be funny, and the characters know they're funny.
Okay.
Like, it's not going to be this kind of, like it's him going to be making much more of a sincere effort to be funny and not kind of subterfuge it in a veil of parody. Like, it's going to be, like, kind of a legit story.
I'd like to see how that would work.
And, I'm very intrigued to see how that works, too, and I know they've been writing it over the past year, and I think he wants to do this self-made music doc, which I think is going to be a parody of a Tom Petty, Peter Bogdanovich doc.
Okay.
Because he for a long time he had a big rivalry with Tom Petty that Tom Petty was not aware about. May he rest in peace.
I was going to say, this seems like the kind of thing that would be very one-sided.
It was mostly that Peter Bogdanovich made like an 8-hour documentary of Tom Petty, and he heard that Tom Petty asked Peter Bogdanovich to make the documentary, and Matt Farley was like, "What?" Like, the ego. Which I feel like he consciously knows.
That feels performative to me.
It's very performative because, of course, his ego is the size of the movie. He thinks he's the greatest singer-songwriter of all time.
Does he really think that?
I think there's part of it that he's like, this part of my act is being this braggadocious. But I think if you've written 20,000 songs, and right now he's got some legit albums, because he's got a band called they change their name all the time. They used to be called Projection from the Side. Now they're called The Big Heist. And they're doing a triple album called Mo 75, which I actually really like. I mean, some people can't stand his voice, and that's fine. I mean, he sounds like Jonathan Richman singing in the shower.
Yeah, his singing voice is fine in the movie. I mean,
yeah, but I know some people find it, like, all his stuff kind of sounds a little too demo-y. But he's got this album called Mo 75, and it's meant to be a sort of meta-narrative. It's like his Quadrophenia. It's sort of about this guy who's graduating, or just graduated, rather, and is trying to spend a really great summer, and no one is kind of rising to the occasion. And all the songs are sort of about this idea that, like, you sometimes make grand plans, you have all these ambitions and plans, and you don't follow through because you keep finding excuses to. And so it's kind of about the various characters in this guy's summer, and then the next album, because there's going to be 3 of them, is sort of about they finally decide to have a party, which was like, we're going to have this party in the woods, it's going to be great. And I feel like a lot of this stuff stems from Matt. And I use this politely, like, he's kind of a square, like, he's kind of like a guy who didn't, like I said, he didn't swear, he doesn't do drugs, he's like straight edge.
Right.
He's a guy who's like, you gotta be responsible. He's always talking about, like, he has actually big rants where he's like, I'm not sympathetic to drug addicts. They brought it on themselves. But at the same time, I feel like he has this desire to live these exciting, like, to sort of romanticize what people find romantic, but he also likes romanticizing the idea of being straight edge. Right. So some of these songs are about, like, how kind of romantic it is to be, to have these kind of, like, 50s nostalgia of, like, what a perfect summer is.
It's hip to be square.
Yeah. I think it's wonderful, and I find it a universe that I, repeatedly enjoy revisiting. I alluded to earlier that he's only one of many sort of outsider artists that I've had an affinity for as of late.
Yeah, who would you recommend?
Another guy I recommend, and the reason why I chose this one is the most accessible, because you can watch his movies, they're almost all on Amazon Prime, and that's where I'd actually encourage people to watch, because I think that's where he gets the most money from, in terms of if you watch it on Amazon, where I feel like on YouTube, I don't know if he's getting, I think on YouTube he actually went through an aggregator, and I think they're collecting most of it. This Kings of Horror or something that they sold it to.
Yeah, I was not familiar with that brand.
No, it's one of the... I mean, I am, because they sometimes send stuff to After Dark. But no, the reason why I picked Matt was simply because I think he's fairly accessible and he can get his stuff. There's a guy named Mickey Reese that I urge everybody to look out for. He's a filmmaker from Oklahoma who in the past 10 years has made an average of 2 feature films a year. Wow. And unlike Matt, his stuff is not in sort of a parody space. It is actually very sincere dramas, and I would actually compare his work to early Soderbergh. I think he's one of the most interesting American filmmakers working today, and actually through working with Fantastic Fest and at TIFF, I've started to see some of his work, and I've actually been connecting him with some producers so that he can actually get a real budget, because all these movies are made for like under 10 grand, but he has an amazing loose remake of Autumn Sonata called Strike Dear Mistress and Kira's Heart that is really remarkable.
I think you've mentioned this to me once before.
Yeah, and he has an amazing Elvis biopic, which I do believe I mentioned to you at one point, called Alien, Mickey Reese's Alien. And it's 48 hours in the life of Elvis, and I think it's really beautifully shot, really esoteric and interesting ways. But I just love his compulsion to just keep making stuff. Like, he just gets the same actors together, and they just go to a new location, and they make a movie about that location. And I really applaud that. There's a guy in LA named Bennett Jones who did a film called I Am a Knife with Legs, which I played at the Film Festival years ago. He's slowly working on his next film. I urge anyone who loves to laugh. No, but it's his stuff is in it's kind of like Flight of the Conchords meets the Zucker Brothers meets there's another one that his style sort of really reminds me of. But anyway, it's a weird kind of action musical comedy, very lo-fi, really, really funny.
It's got a grindhouse vibe to it, even though it's not that thing at all.
Yeah, I Am a Knife with Legs is on Vimeo, and you can rent and buy it. Really, really recommend it. There's a filmmaker that we're going to be showing at the Film Festival this year, too, who I think is extraordinary and sadly passed away when she was quite young, and that's Sarah Jacobson. Have you ever seen any of Sarah Jacobson's films? I was a teenage serial killer, and Mary Jane's Not a Virgin Anymore. She died of cancer, but she won the Sundance Jury Award with Mary Jane's Not a Virgin Anymore. Okay. But yeah, we're going to be showing the new restoration of Mary Jane's Not a Virgin Anymore, and I think it's a real remarkable work that, again, honestly, when it goes back to what, when filmmakers ask me what I'm looking for as a programmer at TIFF or After Dark, so much about it is character and personality and identity, and don't focus so much on the structure of your movie, or like I feel like so many writers focus on structure, and the structure has to be perfect and has to adhere to these rules and these formulas. At the end of the day, if these are characters that I am interested in hanging out with and listening to and hearing them bounce off and wondering what's going to happen to them, that is all I need. And when you watch something like Mary Jane's Not a Virgin Anymore, which I've described as like, it's kind of like a feminist Clerks, if Clerks were a much better movie. And I respect Clerks. But
it's messy and cheap.
But it's messy and cheap. And so is this film. But there's something about this film that its interior world is just so wonderful, and you just want to live and hang with these characters in a really amazing way. And it surprises you, I think, because I think one of the problems is when people get highly structured, it's hard to surprise because you just are familiar with how these stories go. And
we've all internalized the rhythm of the first incident in 18 minutes, and then an action scene every 7,
and then it just becomes about, as you said earlier, like waiting for things to happen. And the best, and it's not even like I'm saying everyone should just make hangout movies. Even though I love a good hangout movie.
Yeah, there's room for those. The worst thing in my experience is a movie that tells me what it's going to do and then does it.
Yeah.
And does nothing else. But,
on the same note, it is fun when a movie tells you what you're going to do. No, it's right. The movie shouldn't tell you what it should do. The movie should do something that makes you think, is the movie going to do this?
Right, yeah.
And then deliver, because that's always satisfying. The upsetting that expectation is satisfying as well. But it's one or the other, but if you telegraph it in a way, the audience feels like they're just waiting for it to happen in a non-suspenseful way, then what are we doing?
Yeah, just the idea of, to get back to the Insidious movies, that all people want is that again.
Yeah.
And so let's do that 5 times. Or the Resident Evil movies where they have a formula, it will not change no matter what you do. Or the Underworld films. All of these films that open with this incredible pitch, this potential for like a radial narrative where you can just keep going in a different direction every time. The thing about Insidious that would change everything, you said it. Like, what if other people are having this experience? Like, we have the internet for that. What about that? What about an idea of all of these different locations being connected to each other and figuring out, like, just...
I just always thought the brilliant
scale.
Concept of that first film was that you can move and it's not going to matter.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I always felt that was the hook to me. You can move, does not matter. It comes with you.
Yeah, and it's early enough in the film that it becomes the first, real plot twist.
Yeah, and I thought that was brilliant, and I just wish that they had embraced that direction and kind of went with that.
Yeah, and the thing I will say for the Riverbeast is that even though there is a standard horror structure of the creature and its defeat, I did not know from scene to scene what was going to be happening.
No, and again, as I alluded to again, it builds up to, I think, a magnificent punchline that is just so... I've always just said, I just love the layers to everything that happens in that scene from both... it involves the statue, is all I'll say. There's a statue, but it also involves a TV conference, and the idea of how underpopulated that room, that they're doing a TV conference for this thing, that there are certain characters not in the room but are watching on TV just so that they can show a shot that people are watching them on TV. I find all those levels and layers to what is happening so funny and so ridiculous, and it's just an accumulative effect of all the quirk in that movie maximizing in that one scene. And that I just really adore and think is so wonderful. Can I plug one random thing that I saw that I just think people should check out if they're interested in seeing, and it's Canadian too, so this will be some CanCon. You might have noticed it on Facebook, but there's this TV show that I just discovered that I've just fallen down the rabbit hole and I'm so obsessed with, because I think it also feels like it was born from a place of, let's just be creative and just, who cares that we don't have any money and resources? Let's just be creative and be interesting. And it was a Canadian television children's series from Northern Ontario, apparently largely produced out of Ottawa, and apparently it's screened on a lot of the public access affiliates throughout the region. It's called Cowboy Who.
I do not know this. No.
I had not heard of the show. It's by a guy named Jeff Green, who was responsible for some full motion video games that were Canadian video games in the mid-90s called Mode and Midnight Stranger, that were about like interacting at a party, that I always found really interesting and been wanting to do something with that. But then I was like, oh, he made this TV show. It lasted for 4 seasons, and I have described the show as if Mark Frost and the Kids in the Hall wrote the segments of YTV's The Zone, and it took place in the Satellite of Love. And someone else asked, like, is it like Doctor Who? I'm like, it's like Doctor Who if Doctor Who was Laura Palmer. Like, the concept is that it's a Howdy Doody TV show, and in the very first episode, the host of this Howdy Doody show goes missing in the middle of a joke. And so subsequent episodes are an investigation as to where the host went missing, while the co-host is still trying to host the kids show. And it is a kids show because it was aired for children.
Kids show about a kids show.
It's a kids show about a kids show. And as the show goes on, it becomes about an alien cover-up, and there's a conspiracy. They always incorporate they always frame the advertising blocks in a way that turn the random advertising that you would see into a joke.
Okay.
Because they'll say something like, the next series of videos you're about to see inspired a religion, and then ads will play. And then they're like, as you can imagine, what kind of civilization and religion that, like weird kind of meta comedy and meta jokes. And it's all done for no money with like maybe a cast of 3 people. Huh. And the fact that it lasted for 4 seasons and has clearly constructed this elaborate labyrinthine mythology. This is so on brand for me. Like this is the stuff that I live for, and I feel like that'll be my next year, is figuring out how can I spread the gospel of Cowboy Who and get this guy Jeff Green, who I have contacted with, and I feel terrible that I haven't been able to set anything up with him yet. Mostly because I feel like he's just done so much that I just don't know how to sell it or how to position it. Mm-hmm. But Cowboy Who is on YouTube, and if you look up Jeff Green, and apparently the first season was released as an independent DVD. If you like Pee-wee's Playhouse and wished it was even weirder, Cowboy Who is the show.
That sounds fantastic, and deeply disturbing to children who would stumble across it.
Yeah.
This is how. Yeah, you're right. This is how religions are born. So yeah, as far as the Matt Farley thing goes, the Riverbeast. Is there anything? I mean, it's the standard closer for the podcast. I'm not sure it really applies here. Is there anything of Don't Let the Riverbeast Get You that you've used or borrowed or stolen or incorporated into your own?
Well, you know what? I think actually Matt's vaudevillian sensibility has been something that actually has rubbed off on Justin and I for Laser Blast. That we've actually borrowed some of the ideas that he's embraced as stuff that we've liked to do for our screenings in terms of doing a goofy intro or trying to build out a narrative that kind of is a joke for no one but ourselves.
Right.
Those are things that and actually it's stuff that I've incorporated into Midnight Madness. Like the very fact that when I took over the Midnight Madness section at TIFF, I had this idea of having a hat stand on stage that I throw my hat onto. Because at that point I actually had retired my hat as like for the listeners at home, I wore a hat for 10 years basically.
Signature hat?
It was a very signature hat, but then I stopped wearing it, and when I got the position I was like, you know what, I'm going to bring it back just for Midnight as a uniform and create this bit of stage business that I'm not ever going to explain. I'm just going to do it. And I felt that was an idea that very much came from someone like Matt Farley that he kind of taught me, that was like, sometimes just do the thing, and if it becomes something that people remember, that's great. If not, who cares? Like, you know, because you had fun doing it.
Yeah.
And that's I feel the lesson of Farley, and that's why I look at that guy and go, man, you've won life. You're doing what you love to do, and sure, you sometimes grumble that not enough people pay attention to you, but you also know that the very act of grumbling is giving you a lot of entertainment. So. It's clearly a bit of a performative thing for him, but he pulls in a good income from people accidentally listening to his music on Spotify. He makes several more on commission, because people now commission him to write music. He occasionally writes jingles for local car dealerships and stuff like that. And he makes movies with his friends, and 20 people from around the world come and see him play every year. So, I mean, I feel like he's won life, and that's why I try to take that ethos and that spirit, and I've begun to put that into the work that I'm continuing to do, is to just sort of have that spirit and remind oneself that you always have fun, and it's, you know, if you build it, they will come. It doesn't get any cornball and fortune cookie and then that.
No, but it's a good philosophy.
Yeah.
Also, you get to show Dial Code Santa Claus.
Yes, which which is an amazing Christmas. Thank you so much too, Norm, for plugging it in Now Magazine.
Oh no, we needed a holiday movie.
And it is a remarkable holiday film. Quickly,
so this will be screening. If you're listening to this on Tuesday when the episode drops, it's screening in Toronto on Thursday night. So you have time. Start walking. You'll make it at the Royal Cinema as part of the Laser Blast Film Society. It was a film we screened in. One of our second or third years of programming this series at the Royal, which is a series that celebrates sort of obscure, eccentric movies, typically from the early 80s to the early mid-90s. We sometimes leave that framework a bit and go a little further either direction. But they're movies that we just feel are sort of bizarre and definitely just not on your radar. Like, we're not interested in conventional canonical cult films. We want the films that haven't yet made the canon. Right. And so actually I feel like Dial Code Santa Claus is poised to actually now enter that canon, because it's finally been given a restoration. Gatekeepers like the Alamo Drafthouse and their American Genre Film Archive have sort of championed the film and are touring the film. So I think it is going to become more of a well-recognized film, which is great, because it's a really wonderful, not really a kid's movie, but a kid's movie about a 10-year-old who believes in Santa Claus so much that he's waiting up all night to get video evidence that Santa Claus exists. Unfortunately, it's the same night that a potential child predator has broken into his house dressed as Santa Claus with ill intent. And this kid, thinking he's actually being pursued by the real Santa Claus, must now decide whether or not he has to do the unthinkable, that he has to kill Santa Claus to protect both himself and his bedridden grandfather. So we've all had this choice.
Yeah, it's everyone becomes a man at one point. Yeah. And this is a story that many are familiar with. But it is a really remarkable film. The director would go on to shoot a lot of TV for George Lucas and Spielberg. He directed a lot of the young Indiana Jones episodes. I really don't understand why he didn't have a bigger career. When you watch this movie, just from an aesthetic level, it's really remarkable. But, he might have just made the wise choice to have a family and, not work himself to death and work in where it was profitable, which was television and commercials.
Early 90s, you can't blame anybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's but he's a really strong visualist. The movie stars his son, which answers the question of how he's able to traumatize this kid and not get away with it. Because it's a really remarkable performance from the kid who really looks scared out of his mind as Santa Claus is coming to get him. But the kid is grown up, well adjusted, and now is a VFX supervisor. So hey,
Well, he's seen it from the other side. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. But yeah, Dial Code Santa Claus on Thursday, December 20th at the Royal Cinema. It's going to be a really fun screening, and the film has never looked better.
Yeah, I've seen I saw the Vimeo link, but I projected it in here, and it looks pretty great.
Yeah.
And if you are listening to this after the fact, it'll probably be on disc before too long.
Yes, yeah. It's already on disc in Europe if you can't wait. But my understanding is that a North American release is around the corner.
Yeah, Alamo doesn't miss a chance on these things. But yeah, try to see it in a theater. It will be an experience. My thanks to Peter Kuplowsky, who'll be presenting that restoration of Dial Code Santa Claus this Thursday, December 20th at the Royal, with Justin Decloux, his partner in the Laser Blast Film Society. If you're in Toronto, you should check that out. It's going to be bananas. You can find Peter on Twitter at Peter Kupow, all one word, Peterkapow, and you can find Don't Let the Riverbeast Get You on DVD from Brain Damage Films. It's also streaming on Amazon Video in the US, and in Canada you can find it on YouTube. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you feel like leaving a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or wherever you enjoy the show, that would be greatly appreciated. Every little bit helps. It truly does. Oh, and come back next week. We're not taking Christmas off. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.